Logan Paul asks Cliffe Connectly, why Christianity? Why is Christianity the true religion? Why is Christianity the only way? Why? All right, let's go ahead and share the screen.
And I try to work hard and I try to love the people around me as much as I can. And by the way, I f up a lot, but I guess like I started by saying I'm just like unwilling to subscribe to a religion, because then I guess this leads into this conversation. Why Christianity? There's so many denominations out there, and to be able to like put your foot down on one, especially when they all have such positive teachings for the most part, it's just so hard for me. I just don't know if I'm willing to make that assertion just yet. So why Christianity is the question.
All right. First of all, you're right. I can't prove God. But Logan, I think you've got God bearing down hard on you through your mom. I think it's real clear that your mom loves you.
Is that true, Ma? She's holding the cross. Can you at least get a thumbs up or something?
She just holds up
the cross.
She's like, can't discuss the love of Logan.
But here's a cross.
I do love Jesus.
I don't think that your mom's love for you is simply a chemical reaction. I think your mom has made a decision over your entire life to care for you, to provide for you, to protect you, to sacrifice for you. That is far beyond an animal instinct. That is a free decision your precious mother has made to really love you, to really care for you. Love, the experience of love, points us to reality, including some type of God. Okay, then the next question is, yeah, but who is this God? And that's where Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Confucius, Buddhists, all the avatars of Hinduism come in, all claiming to be revealing God accurately. But the historical evidence is Jesus lived a sinless life. He never sinned once.
So Logan says, why Christianity? There are so many denominations out there. Now, I think that's a good point. And get into, who is this God? Cliffe points to Jesus' lifestyle, his ethical teachings, how they demand respect. Now, most importantly, he says 3 days after he died, he physically rises from the dead. I love how Cliffe answers this question here. Why Christianity? Because Christianity alone makes most sense of the world we live in. Compared to other worldviews, Christianity matches up the most with reality. I truly appreciate that Cliffe doesn't just stop by showing that Christianity is objectively true. He points out how it is good, starting with the person of Jesus. So much of what we value and cherish in our world, particularly out here in the West, comes from a Judeo-Christian worldview. That's why you hear people like Richard Dawkins claiming to be a cultural Christian and other atheists changing their tune when it comes to Christianity. When you compare the central figures of other faith traditions to Jesus, it is clear who is the better example to follow. Comparing Jesus to Muhammad, hate to say it, there's no contest, but all this is of no ultimate value if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. That is what the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15. But here's the thing. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence showing that he did, in fact, raise bodily from the dead. We get caught up in trying to show that Christianity is true, and we should. That is good. I think it's important also to answer the question that I think is kind of going up a notch, is showcasing and showing that Christianity is good, because it is indeed good. Historically, that's what the evidence shows. If you haven't checked out Tom Holland's Dominion book, I'm going through it right now. Wow. Just seeing how things changed so drastically when this person of Jesus comes to the scene, incredible.
In John chapter 8, he could look into the faces of his enemies and say, which one of you can prove me guilty of sin? And his enemies were silent. Secondly, he taught amazing ethical teachings that I think all of us respect highly. The Sermon on the Mount is obviously ethical genius. All right, profound ethical genius. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. So his lifestyle, his ethical teachings demand respect. Thirdly, you watch him die. At the moment of his most excruciating pain and agony, nailed to a wooden crossbeam, instead of cursing his enemies the way I would have, he prays, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Well, my respect for him skyrockets. But fourthly, and most importantly, 3 days after he dies, he physically, bodily rises from the dead, and over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him different times, different places, risen from the dead, Paul records in 1 Corinthians 15.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that?
You know that in the same way that you know that George Washington was the first president of the United States, that you know that Adolf Hitler really committed the atrocities he did. It's called historical knowledge.
But those recent events those events you just cited happened much more recently.
Yes.
And are much more well documented
Yes.
than potentially 2,000 years of lost history.
Bingo. Correct. But the great news is, in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we have a very, very reliable historical record based on over 5,800 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 manuscripts in the Latin Vulgate, and about 9,800 in Ethiopic, Coptic, Armenian, Syriac, Gothic, and Slavic.
Basically, like they were almost approved and given credibility to in the short term thereafter. And that added a more extensive proof to the story back.
Essentially, they were like corroborated.
Yeah, that's
evidence.
That's kind of
Logan asked the question, right? And he thinks he really did something here. He says, how do you know that? And Cliffe answers historical knowledge, which I think is something that we should also factor in when we engage in these conversations. Logan's pushback is, oh, those events happened much more recently. They're much more well documented. I like how Cliffe goes back to the four Gospels. The four Gospel accounts provide a very reliable historical record based on over 5,000 manuscripts. I think 5,000 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, 9,800 Ethiopic, Coptic, Armenian, Syriac. I do appreciate how Logan kind of realizes, oh, yeah, that makes sense. He says, so it was essentially corroborated, right? Shout out to Mike for helping him out there. I listened to some of Cliffe's stuff, and I never listened to something this in-depth. Cliffe is very prepared for this conversation, which I guess shouldn't be all that surprising considering that he's going to colleges and engaging college students, right, at the college campuses. The historical knowledge argument is such a good point. If you want to take the approach that Logan is pushing forward here, then there's very little you can know about history. This is something I think people don't always realize. If you want to discredit this, you got to discredit a lot of other things that go along or are in the same time frame, especially ancient history, figures like Plato and Aristotle. I think it's funny. You never hear people question things about Plato or Aristotle, right? Yeah, Plato and Aristotle would have been before the time of Jesus, but we're going to just accept that wholesale. Come on now. Logan says that the facts surrounding George Washington and Hitler are much more well documented. Honestly, I would push back on this. I understand that they are more recent, so the type of evidence that we have is different, but better documented. Not sure about that. I love how Cliffe doesn't back down from insisting that the gospel accounts have proven to be very reliable. This isn't really up for debate anymore. Even secular skeptical scholars, we're talking about people that don't adhere to Christianity, consider the gospels to be very reliable. Now, they may disagree and nitpick on different points, but as a whole, yes, they are considered to be very reliable. There have been numerous attempts, right, to discredit the reliability of the gospel, and they have all fallen short. The things the authors know, the accuracy in how they describe it, have shown time and time again that we can have confidence in what was recorded. The manuscript evidence for the New Testament is truly remarkable, and scholars from other historical studies marvel at the wealth of text for the New Testament. They're in awe of the amount of evidence that biblical scholars have when it comes to the New Testament. That doesn't happen, especially when we're talking about ancient history. I know some people obviously are going to push back and say how a lot of those manuscripts are later in the timeline, and that is true, but that doesn't negate the manuscripts that we have that are very close to the time of when the originals were written. Just think about this, right? The fact that you find a fragment of the Gospel of John dating to the 2nd century, that's going to be anywhere from 100 to 200. If I'm not mistaken, some of the date ranges for the Gospel of John, this particular fragment, let me make sure I correct myself here. This particular fragment is dated from AD 125 to about 175. Some people will stretch it closer to 200. But think about what I'm saying here. This fragment from the 2nd century is found in Africa. That's amazing. The Gospel of John is written somewhere in Jerusalem, perhaps, Ephesus, in that area, where John was in Patmos. even though Patmos is going to be later on in the timeline. But that think about it. They don't have cars. They ain't flying over there. To get it from there to there, that's a long trip. Even if you drive or you fly, right? Imagine walking or riding a camel or however they did transportation back then. I think you also have to consider the writing material that was being used for these manuscripts. And yeah, like as I mentioned earlier, I love how Logan kind of realizes that, wow, it was corroborated. Yeah, that's just incredible.
But to your good point, I've doubted more than my brothers all life long. And my 3-year-old daughter the other day was like, I don't believe in God. Like, I can't see, touch, taste. So I'm like, you're 3. What is going on here? It's so in the genes. I just hate it.
You just took a bite of Play-Doh.
Exactly. I don't even answer this. And so I love that about the Christian faith, unlike other faiths, which is, yeah.
So, but it sounds like this person that you were going back and forth with is talking about your certainty in the belief of Jesus, that he existed. That's what it sounds like. And I guess that's kind of was my question as well. Like how do you know? Is because the preservation of history is, excuse me, freaking difficult. That's extremely difficult, by the way. History is often written by the victors, right? And I don't know who the victor is in this case, but like
So let's stop right there. Logan says history is written by the victors. Okay, sure. I think this is sometimes overstated, but let's take this to be correct, right? Who was the victor in ancient Rome? Right? Who was the victor in ancient Rome during this time? Well, it wasn't the Christians. It would be 300 years plus before Christianity was even somewhat allowed, somewhat accepted. So by that argument, I think it further shows the truth of Christianity. And he kind of hits on this very briefly, but he says the whole Jesus didn't exist. There are no scholars that deny that Jesus existed. That's just an internet trend. Bart Ehrman, perhaps one of the leading New Testament scholars, agnostic or skeptic, even he has written and said over and over again that this idea that Jesus did not exist is nonsense. We can be pretty certain that Jesus existed as a historical figure. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.